China seems to have begun eyeing certain Russian territories, a covert move that stabs its ally in the back. In the past, Russia has repeatedly pressured China from annexing territory, in the 19th century to centuries-long power struggles. The relationship between these two powers has always been fraught with instability. We must revisit their complex and turbulent history to understand deep-seated tensions better. After World War II, China entered a period of rapid cultural and industrial transformation, emerging as a powerhouse in the communist world, second only to the Soviet Union. At that time, the Soviet Union, the leading economy, provided weapons and essential resources to support China. However, this alliance was never excellent. When Stalin died, Mao Zedong hoped that China would rise to lead the communist movement. Yet Beijing remained in the shadow of the Soviet Union until its collapse in 1991. Ironically, the US contributed to normalizing relations between China and the Soviet Union. Amid escalating tensions between the two nations, China had to acknowledge the overwhelming power of the US. This pushed the relationship between the Soviet Union, China, and the US into a state of complex competition. In the post-Soviet era, Russia sought to improve relations with China, with both nations identifying the US as a common adversary. This laid the foundation for today's unlimited partnership, a relationship built more on shared opposition than genuine friendship. Over the past decade, under the continuous leadership of Putin and Xi Jinping, Sino-Russian ties have grown stronger, with the shared goal of curbing US influence. However, historical wounds have never fully healed. China still remembers the times Russia betrayed it, while Russia remains wary of Beijing's rise. The warm proclamations displayed by Chinese and Russian leaders in the media cannot erase the reality that there remain fractures in their relationship that are difficult to mend. To understand how deep these fractures run, we must return to the 19th century, when Russia began annexing Chinese lands. Unlike European powers that returned territories to China after the Opium Wars, Russia held on to the territories it had seized, a painful injustice for China, under the so-called unequal treaties. Russia took control of the Outer Manchuria region, including Preamuri, the Jewish Autonomous Oblast, and areas east of the Ussuri River, stripping China of access to the Sea of Japan, and solidifying Russia's strategic foothold. Although sparsely populated, this loss inflicted deep spiritual and cultural wounds on China. The border along the Amur and Ussuri rivers has frequently been the site of clashes, ranging from skirmishes between fishermen to conflicts in the present day. China has always insisted on shared use of these rivers, while Russia has adamantly maintained absolute control, given the immense resources these waterways provide. Tensions peaked in 1969, when the Soviet Union and China engaged in a fierce battle on Damansky Island, known as Zhenbao Dao in Chinese. The bloody conflict claimed hundreds of lives, and the Soviet Union declared victory. Another hotspot is Bolshoi Ussuriysky Island, also known as Da Wusuli Dao in Chinese, located at the strategic confluence of two rivers. This 350 square kilometer island is a crucial choke point for maritime transport. If China were to control it fully, the city of Khabarovsk, the second largest urban center in Russia's Far East, would fall within Beijing's military range. Fully aware of this threat, Russia has been determined to hold on to it at all costs. 2004, Russia ceded half of the island to China, but Beijing remains unsatisfied. In 2023, China released a new map depicting the island as its own, a veiled message directed at President Putin. Xi Jinping's territorial ambitions persist, and as Russia becomes increasingly bogged down in Ukraine, China quietly consolidates its strength, biding its time to reclaim what it believes rightfully belongs to it. Bolshoi Ussuriysky Island stands as clear evidence of these ambitions. Although much of the island remains undeveloped, its strategic location makes it a vital choke point that neither Beijing nor Moscow can overlook. For Russia, the immediate risk is apparent. Should the island fall into Beijing's hands, the city of Khabarovsk, with its population of over 600,000, would no longer be a secure stronghold. History has shown us similar scenarios, such as Russia's annexation of Finnish territory during World War II, to push the border further away from St. Petersburg. Modern Moscow is no less willing to do whatever it takes to protect what it deems national interests, and disputed areas like Outer Manchuria and contested islands are no exception. On paper, the dispute over Bolshoi Ussuriski Island was resolved through the 2004 treaty, which split the island between Russia and China, granting China access to transport routes along the Amur and Ussuri rivers. Beijing gained much without firing a single shot, but Xi Jinping has not stopped there, nurturing long-standing aspirations. In the context of Russia's current weakness, this presents a golden opportunity. The island dispute is the tip of the iceberg, hinting at far greater ambitions beneath the surface. Border conflicts of the 1960s have now resurfaced in a new form. The decision to publish the 2023 map was a deliberate signal. Xi Jinping aims for China to reclaim border milestones at the height of the Qing dynasty. Yet the ambitions do not stop at small islands. In the north bordering Russia, the longer-term goal extends to Siberia and the resource-rich Far East. These are areas abundant in resources, which China covets to sustain its growth. With a population 10 times that of Russia, China holds a clear advantage, as demonstrated by Lake Baikal, the world's largest freshwater lake by volume. As groundwater supplies in China become increasingly depleted and polluted, the search for new water sources has grown urgent. During the 2010s, Chinese companies sought every means to access land around Lake Baikal, constructing pipelines to transport water to densely populated regions far away. Although Russian protests forced the government to cancel these projects, China's thirst for resources has never abated. With 90% of its groundwater undrinkable, China has no choice but to expand beyond its borders, and Russia's pristine, untapped lands have become the perfect target. This pressing demand has driven both nations into a precarious position. Russia's stagnant economy and declining population leave many regions vulnerable, while China grows increasingly assertive and ambitious. For Beijing, keeping Russia mired in Ukraine is merely the first step in a broader plan to create a geopolitical power bloc capable of challenging the U.S. China requires vast resources to fuel its ambitious projects. China requires vast resources to fuel its ambitious projects to realize this goal. The Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, is a global megaproject by China aimed at expanding its influence through a vast network of roads, railways, and maritime routes. Often likened to a modern Silk Road, its core objective is to directly connect China with strategic regions, including the Himalayas and the Middle East, areas abundant in oil reserves. Countries like Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Iraq rank among the global oil production and reserves. Oil flow from the Middle East to China currently depends on maritime routes via the Indian Ocean and the Strait of Malacca. As the world's largest oil importer, with 15 million barrels per day in 2024, accounting for 20% of global demand, China views the Strait of Malacca as a critical choke point. This dependency makes the strait one of China's most significant strategic vulnerabilities, as nearly all commercial ships from China to the West must pass through it. Over the past 3 decades, Beijing has quietly fortified military bases near the area, partly to prepare for long-term scenarios involving conflict with the U.S. and members of the Quad Alliance, including Australia, Japan, and India. In a worst-case scenario, this alliance could completely blockade the Strait of Malacca, strangling China's critical trade routes. Such an event would place China's economy in a precarious position, especially given its heavy reliance on imported resources. This dependence has also driven China's aggressive efforts to drill for oil in the South China Sea, despite many reserves being located within the territorial waters of other nations. Through the BRI, China is betting on developing railway systems and satellite ports to ensure the free flow of resources like oil without relying on the Strait of Malacca. This approach mitigates strategic risks and attracts other nations to collaborate in protecting Beijing's vital trade routes. Approximately 145 countries, primarily developing nations, in Africa and South America, have expressed interest in joining the BRI. This project expands China's global influence and grants it a formidable position in geopolitics and trade relations. However, with an enormous cost of $10 trillion and slow progress over a decade, the BRI faces numerous challenges. China is focused on completing a stable land route connecting it with Pakistan, which is a crucial strategic move. Although not officially part of the BRI, this route would facilitate direct trade from China to Pakistan and the Middle East, via the Arabian Sea, helping Beijing bypass U.S. influence in the Indian Ocean. Russia plays a significant role in the Belt and Road Initiative, ensuring China has abundant resources from Siberia. However, Russia's role extends beyond resource provision. As a strategic partner, Moscow's actions directly impact Beijing's interests. As Russia continues its war in Ukraine and China is accused of aiding Russia in circumventing Western sanctions, many BRI partners have grown increasingly wary. Several nations are reassessing the project's economic benefits and leaning towards strengthening trade relations with the U.S. rather than China. This is one reason Beijing has persistently urged Russia to withdraw from the Ukraine conflict, as prolonged war only destabilizes its critical alliances. Moreover, the BRI is an ambitious but costly project. The COVID-19 pandemic severely weakened the economies of developing nations, which are key targets for China's investment plans. Economic downturns have caused many investment projects to fail, pushing some countries into debt. While this may enhance China's influence in the short term, it creates long-term risks. Unsustainable debt undermines trust among partners, and Russia's war in Ukraine has further disrupted the global economy.